Let's tell us a little bit about how Fuentes came to your attention and the video that you made about that has received this.
Thanks, Lewis. Good morning. I've been concerned for quite a while about the rise of anti-Semitism on the right in the United States. Actually, not just of anti-Semitism, but of nativism and racism and its implications for us, our security, the political debate in this country. And Nick Fuentes, who I think is one of the worst of those people, was interviewed by Tucker Carlson, another broadcaster on X and YouTube, who gave him a really softball interview, the clear attempt being to kind of soften Nick Fuentes' image, and he'd done a number of these other interviews. I didn't think it was any longer possible just to ignore him, so I was pleased when Piers Morgan challenged him to come on his show, and Piers intended to challenge him. So I offered to Piers and then sent to him a video in which I talked about my mother and my father. I've written a book about my mum and dad, which was about their interactions with Stalin and Hitler. My mother was in a concentration camp in Belsen. My grandmother died as a result. My father was sent to a state collective farm. Fuentes has also praised Stalin, so both of those were relevant. And Piers played that on his show to challenge Fuentes. Now, as you would expect, Fuentes didn't then go, yes, you're quite right, I'm going to go on an awareness course. He robustly responded, and in that way achieved at least one of my political objectives, which was to make clear to the rest of the right that he had gone as far as endorsing Hitler, which I don't think someone like Tucker Carlson would want to do. He's much more careful than that. So it cuts him off a bit from the right. But what I probably hadn't anticipated the degree of, it started then a huge social media, I suppose, campaign. I was certainly bombarded with thousands of messages of people. It's a bit like, you know, those American high school movies where you get someone like Biff Tannen in Back to the Future, and he's surrounded by sort of gormless friends of the bully who can't make their own jokes but laugh at his unfunny ones. And that's what happened to me. Thousands of, I'll repeat examples. I mean, it's basically, he talked about me mum, right, using Dick Van Dyke's words, and he then made a little sort of video in which he said, I'm sure the British call it the holly, and I've had thousands of me mum died in the holly. I've had songs, videos made of me. Pretty extraordinary. I'm fairly robust. It was nevertheless a bit distressing, but I do remind myself it was, you know, my own actions deliberately to take it on, and in some ways I'm exposing something I need to know exists.
It's difficult, isn't it, Daniel? And I sort of, anybody in the media, particularly broadcast media, actually, I think has a sort of wrestled with this more and more. There can be no doubt that on the right and left, in all sorts of different directions, extremism in politics is becoming and has become normalised. There is therefore, for the first time, I think, a real dilemma, because in the past it was much easier to put people like Fuentes into a hermetically sealed vault, to ignore them, to allow their views to remain fringe. That now no longer seems particularly acceptable as a means of nullifying these views or just ignoring them. And yet at the same time, the dilemma is that there can be no doubt. And, you know, Piers Morgan interview that you mentioned, very robust on Fuentes, made him look like a fool in all sorts of ways, but nonetheless can be argued to have continued that process of normalisation and provided him with a yet bigger platform. It is an extremely difficult dilemma.
It is, and reasonable people can differ. I know Kathleen Stock wrote an article in Unheard where she thought that Piers Morgan had completely failed. She was obviously baffled by my suggestion that it was the right thing to do. She picked out my segment as being particularly, particularly problematic, and I just think she's wrong. But I don't think it's bonkers, her view. I totally understand it. I just think it's wrong. You simply can't make these people go away by ignoring the fact that they exist, and the fact that we're talking about this is helpful. Your listeners need to understand how strong this strand of thinking is becoming among a lot of young people, just as it was important at one point for a lot of people to understand the influence Andrew Tate was having. It doesn't, in some ways, it brought Andrew Tate to more people's attention. It possibly expands his audience a bit, but I think more than that, it definitely does bring pressure on these people, which they're not necessarily capable of dealing with, and that is valuable. So it is a choice, I agree.
And I think we should be sort of clear about what is going on, because most people, thankfully, are not privy to these conversations. It seems to me that the thing that is new or actually it's old, but it's new in our political context, is that what you're seeing, particularly on the politics of the American right, and it was epitomised in that interview that you mentioned with Fuentes and Tucker Carlson, is actually basically the resurrection of a very old type of anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism on the old right, which is basically to say that Jews are always going to be unassimilable into Western society, that they are a problem, a sort of enemy within, and that they manipulate things and manipulate our politics accordingly. And you see that with the way that America behaves with regards to Israel, but also all sorts of other things. This is not something that has been heard for quite a long time in any mainstream way, but is becoming mainstream again.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I have always been incredibly careful about the use of the anti-Semitism term. So unlike a lot of other people, for example, I never called Jeremy Corbyn anti-Semitic. Right? I did think he had a sort of view that derived from his Marxism, or his sort of his Leninist imperialism influenced politics that made him obsessive about Israel and unbalanced. But that is a different thing from accusing him of anti-Semitism, and I didn't do that. I think some of his followers were, but I never said that about him. And the reason I didn't was because it was an important term to reserve for this kind of instance. I didn't want people to turn around and say, well, you think everything's anti-Semitic. I really don't. But obviously this is dangerous, and it's not dangerous just to Jews, right? Because a conspiracy theory that thinks that the United States has been manipulated into foreign wars by a small elite, as it happens Jewish, is one that sort of denies the whole process of liberal democracy, and it might do the same in this country. And it's also that kind of disrespect for one ethnic group will apply to others, even if they don't like Jews. So for Muslims who don't like, some of whom don't like Jews, a proportion of whom don't like Jews, this will visit them, probably has visited them, and so I'm concerned about them in this as well. This is not just about Jews. It's very important to understand. It's about the health of our liberal democracy, and people like Nick Fuentes, who are coming for me, are coming for all of you.
Just finally, Danny, obviously a lot of the absolute bile, and bile's probably even understating it, that you've received as a result of this. Obviously, some of it will be from the UK, some of it will be from the US, from all over the world. Some of them will be bots, and it's sort of hard to trace these people. Nonetheless, how has this left you feeling? How is it sitting with you in terms of your own relationship with this country at the moment?
I love this country, and I think Jews have got a problem, which is we're not fully safe everywhere. But of all the places in the world, I'm really happy my parents settled in this country, and I particularly love London. I'm glad to be speaking to LBC for that reason. This is a great city to live in. So, the other thing I'm anxious to say is I'm nobody's victim. My parents didn't feel that either. They were very concerned to live a full and happy life. That was their triumph, actually, that they did that. My concern is just with the health of liberal democracy, with protecting us from the mistakes that overwhelmed civilization in the middle of the 20th century, and absolutely can again, because people don't sometimes value enough the processes of liberal democracy and also of a moderate and reasonable temperament. And so I put up with this stuff, I wouldn't say happily. It has definitely been a bit distressing, Lewis, definitely. And you've experienced sometimes, people being antagonistic to you on social media. It's never nice. And this is particularly horrible because it has things like my dad's head on a lampshade, or calling my mum a bar of soap. And it's really, I only share those. They're almost hard to spit out just so that people understand how disgusting it was. But it is actually, because I'm still getting hundreds of these every day. But I think it's just important to challenge it, and insofar that is my reassurance, basically, that it was the right thing to do, and necessary to understand, so that we can all combat it, however unpleasant it is.